You're very brave, but you'll die, human. I accidentally bumped into the alien vampire woman's butt. Station Krell 9 smelled like every other half-dead orbital platform Liam had ever visited. Burnt circuits, recycled air that had been recycled one too many times, and the peculiar metallic tang that came from hull breaches that had been sealed but not quite forgotten. The war had been over for 3 months, but nobody had bothered to tell the station. Scorch marks still decorated the walls in abstract patterns that probably meant something profound to someone who'd been here during the actual fighting. To Liam, they just looked like the universe's worst interior design choice. He shifted the pack of data cores on his shoulder and tried not to think about how his boots kept sticking to the deck plating. Something had leaked here, coolant probably, or possibly something biological that he really didn't want to identify. The gravity generators were running at about 80%, giving everything a slightly floaty quality that made his stomach do interesting things after 12 hours of transit from the fleet staging area. Just drop them at the command data center, his CO had said. Simple courier run. Nothing complicated. Right. Simple. Except the command section was on the opposite end of the station, through corridors that had seen more action than most ground troops, and the internal transit system was down for repairs. Again. Or still. Liam wasn't entirely clear on whether it had ever actually worked since the ceasefire. He rounded a corner, consulting the handheld nav unit that claimed to have updated station maps. The screen flickered, displaying what he was reasonably certain was either his current location or possibly a recipe for something called Veleth protein surprise. The translation matrix on these things had never been great, and the joint occupation had done nothing to improve them. A chunk of twisted metal protruded from the deck ahead, right where 2 corridors intersected. Some maintenance crew had helpfully marked it with orange safety tape, as if bright plastic ribbon would somehow prevent people from noticing the meter-long piece of shrapnel jutting up like a sculpture commemorating humanity's ongoing battle with basic spatial awareness. Liam sidestepped it carefully, his attention on the nav unit, trying to determine if he needed to go left or prepare protein surprise. The screen flickered again. Definitely left. Probably left. His boot caught on something. The universe had a sense of humor, Liam had always believed. It was the only explanation for things like black holes, quantum uncertainty, and the fact that his girlfriend had left him for a cargo hauler pilot 3 days before he shipped out. But this was the universe really committing to the bit. He pitched forward, arms windmilling in the reduced gravity, the pack of data cores swinging wildly on his shoulder. Time did that thing it always did in moments of absolute catastrophe, stretching out so he could fully appreciate every horrible millisecond of his impending humiliation. He was going to hit the deck, hard, probably break something, definitely break his dignity. His hands made contact with something that was definitely not the deck, something soft, something curved, something that his brain, even in the midst of panic, categorically identified as a woman's posterior. Oh no! Oh no, no, no! Liam's forward momentum carried him into a full collision, his face briefly making contact with the small of someone's back before he managed to bounce backward in the low gravity, overcorrected, and landed on his own rear end with a metallic thunk that echoed through the corridor. The woman turned around. The universe wasn't just committing to the bit anymore. The universe had gone full method actor. She was tall, easily 6 feet, with skin so pale it seemed to drink the light rather than reflect it. White hair pulled back in a knot so severe it looked like it could cut glass. The uniform was immaculate, dark and precisely tailored, with insignia that Liam's brain tried very hard not to process, because processing them would mean acknowledging exactly how catastrophically he'd just ended his career and possibly his life. Then she looked at him, and he saw her eyes, crimson, bright as fresh blood, bright as warning lights, bright as every terrible decision he'd ever made compressed into a single moment of eye contact. The corridor had gone absolutely silent. Liam became aware of other people, soldiers, both human and Veleth, all of whom had apparently been in the middle of important military business before freezing like someone had hit pause on reality. They were backing away, slowly, carefully, the way you backed away from unexploded ordnance. One of the human Marines had gone completely white, A Valeth officer with the standard violet eyes looked like she was watching a shuttle crash in slow motion and couldn't decide whether to help or just close her eyes. Liam's brain finally processed the insignia. 4 stars. General. Oh, this was so much worse than he'd thought. He started, his voice coming out as a squeak that would have been embarrassing under normal circumstances and was absolutely mortifying now. I didn't. The deck, there was debris. The general, because of course she was a general, because the universe didn't do anything by halves when it decided to destroy him, tilted her head slightly. One white eyebrow rose a fraction of an inch. The gesture was so controlled, so precise, that it somehow made her more terrifying than if she'd simply drawn the wicked-looking blade at her hip and ended him. You, she said, her voice low and smooth, and somehow cold, despite the recycled warmth of the station air, are either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. Stupid, Liam heard himself say. Definitely stupid. Sir, ma'am, General, I apologize. I'll just report myself for disciplinary action and save everyone the trouble. He started to scramble to his feet, which was harder than it should have been in the reduced gravity. His boots skidded on whatever he'd tripped over in the first place. A piece of conduit housing. Fantastic. And he nearly went down again. A hand caught his arm, pale fingers, ice cold even through his sleeve, steadying him with casual strength. Liam looked up into those crimson eyes again and forgot how to breathe. The general was standing very close now, close enough that he could see the elongated points of her ears, the subtle iridescence in her white hair that spoke of Valeth genetics, close enough to feel the strange cold that seemed to radiate from her skin like she was her own personal cooling unit. You're very brave, she said quietly, and there was something in her voice now that Liam couldn't quite identify. Something that definitely wasn't anger, but might be worse. But you'll die, human. The words hung in the recycled air like a death sentence, which Liam was reasonably certain they were. His mind raced through everything he knew about Valeth military protocol, which wasn't much beyond don't upset them, and seriously, don't upset them. He'd clearly failed on both counts. The general was still holding his arm, those ice-cold fingers maintaining contact longer than seemed strictly necessary for keeping him upright. And Liam had the bizarre thought that for someone about to execute him, she seemed remarkably invested in his continued vertical status. I accept full responsibility, he managed, trying to sound professional and dignified despite the fact that he was still half sprawled against a bulkhead with data cores digging into his spine. It was an accident, but that's no excuse for— Do you know who I am? The general interrupted, and there was something almost curious in her tone, like she was conducting a survey rather than preparing to end his life. Liam's mouth engaged before his brain could stop it. You're either General Zavine, the pale shadow of Sector 7, terror of the Viridian cluster, and the reason my CO needs anxiety medication, or you're someone who just happens to have identical taste in terrifying military fashion. I'm really hoping for option 2, but the universe has never liked me that much. One of the Marines made a strangled noise. The Valeth officer with violet eyes looked like she was seriously considering just shooting Liam herself to speed up the process. General Zavine's expression didn't change, but something flickered in those crimson eyes. Your commanding officer needs anxiety medication? Captain Torres eats antacids like candy whenever your name comes up in briefings, Liam said, and some distant part of his brain was screaming at him to shut up. Shut up! You're making it worse. Said you once spaced an entire boarding party for tracking mud on your ship's deck, which seems extreme, but I wasn't there, so maybe it was really nice flooring. It was hydroponic soil, Zavine said, and I didn't space them. I made them clean every deck on the ship, with standard issue brushes, for a week. That's actually much more reasonable than the stories suggest. The version where I spaced them is better for morale, on both sides. She still hadn't let go of his arm. You're not afraid. Liam laughed, a slightly hysterical sound that echoed off the scorched bulkheads. I'm absolutely terrified. I'm just also apparently having some kind of stress-induced break from reality where my mouth has declared independence from my brain. It happens, usually right before something terrible, and yet you're still talking. It's a compulsion, like a nervous tic, but with worse consequences. He took a breath, trying to stabilize himself. The reduced gravity wasn't helping. Neither was the cold radiating from her hand. Look, General, I genuinely apologize. I tripped. I grabbed. It was completely unintentional and wholly inappropriate. I'll accept whatever punishment you deem fit, up to and including cleaning decks with standard issue brushes, and I promise my CO will have me transferred to waste reclamation before you can finish the paperwork. Savine tilted her head again, studying him with an intensity that made him want to squirm. When I said you would die, Navigator, I wasn't issuing a threat. The corridor seemed to get quieter, if that was possible. The other soldiers had pressed themselves so far back against the walls, they were practically merging with the bulkheads. That's usually what that phrase means, Liam said carefully. Context matters. She released his arm finally, but didn't step back. If anything, she'd moved closer, near enough that he could see the fine, almost translucent quality of her skin, like porcelain stretched over something ancient and dangerous. Tell me what you know about my kind, the ones with eyes like mine. Oh no. Liam's brain, which had been operating in crisis mode, suddenly shifted into a different kind of panic entirely. I know that standard briefings use the phrase unique metabolic requirements, and that unofficial briefings use a much shorter word that starts with V and ends with my CO changing the subject really quickly. Vampire, Xavine said unbothered. Your people dance around it, ours don't. It's what I am. Right, okay, that's very direct. I find directness saves time. Her crimson eyes hadn't left his face, and life expectancy varies depending on honesty. Liam swallowed hard. The classified files say that Valeth with crimson eyes form bonds, deep ones, and that humans who enter those bonds have a survival rate that's statistically identical to juggling live grenades while riding a malfunctioning grav bike through an asteroid field. Poetic. I had a lot of time during the transit here. Your reputation is very thoroughly documented. And yet you're still standing here, making jokes about my flooring preferences. Something that might have been amusement crossed her features. Most humans won't even make eye contact once they realize what I am. They certainly don't reference my service record with sarcasm. To be fair, I've already committed what's probably a court-martial offense. May as well go for comprehensiveness. The Valeth officer had apparently reached her limit. General Xavine, if you require assistance with this situation, I can have security. No. Xavine's voice carried absolute authority, the kind that made junior officers snap to attention across 3 sectors. Leave us, all of you, now. The corridor emptied with impressive speed. Marines and Valeth soldiers alike discovered urgent business elsewhere, their boots clanging on the deck plates as they retreated. The violet-eyed officer lingered a moment longer, shooting Liam a look that clearly said, "You're already dead. You just don't know it yet," before following her comrades. Then it was just the 2 of them in the scarred corridor, surrounded by the debris of a war that had supposedly ended. Liam tried very hard not to think about what "leave us" might mean. He failed completely. You felt cold, he said, because apparently his mouth had decided they were committed to this suicide by conversation approach. When you caught me, colder than the station ambient. We run cold, lower metabolism between feedings. Savine stepped closer, and Liam's back hit the bulkhead. Does that frighten you? Everything about this situation frightens me, but in descending order, you specifically, the fact that I'm still talking, and that weird stain on the deck that might be moving. She glanced down. That's a lubricant leak. Deck 7 had coolant system damage. Oh good, so just regular station decay, not a biological horror. Those are in Deck 12. Hydroponics experiment went poorly. You're joking. The corner of her mouth twitched. Perhaps. Liam had been in combat simulations that felt less dangerous than this moment. At least in simulations, you knew the parameters. You understood the wind conditions. Here, standing in a half-wrecked corridor with the most feared general in 7 sectors, close enough that he could count the individual strands of her white hair, he had absolutely no idea what the victory condition looked like, or if survival even qualified. So, he heard himself say, on a scale of 1 to catastrophically doomed, Where exactly am I right now? Zavine's eyes, those impossible crimson eyes that looked like someone had taken warning lights and made them sentient, studied him with an expression he couldn't parse. That depends entirely on your next choice. I was afraid you'd say something like that. Liam shifted his weight, trying to find a position against the bulkhead that didn't make him feel quite so much like cornered prey. The data cores in his pack dug into his shoulders. Somewhere in the distance, he could hear the station's life support system cycling, a rhythmic hum that was probably supposed to be soothing, but currently sounded like a countdown timer. Does this choice involve filling out extensive paperwork? Because I'm very good at paperwork. Captain Torres says my incident reports are depressingly thorough. You write a lot of incident reports. There was a thing with a cargo loader and 3 chickens last year. Nobody could prove I was involved, but the reports were excellent. 3 chickens, Savine repeated, and Liam could swear there was actual amusement in her voice now. On a fleet vessel. They were therapy chickens. For morale, the pilot was from an agricultural colony and got homesick. He was babbling now, he knew it, but the alternative was focusing on the fact that a woman who could probably kill him 17 different ways without breaking a sweat was standing close enough that he could feel that strange cold emanating from her skin. Turns out chickens don't respond well to zero-G transitions. Very tragic. Feathers everywhere. The cargo bay still smells weird. And yet they let you handle sensitive data cores. In their defense, the chickens were an outlier. My actual service record is remarkably boring. Navigation charts, route plotting, the occasional supply run like this one, nothing exciting. I once recalculated a jump sequence that saved the fleet 3 hours, which earned me a commendation and absolutely no respect from anyone who had to listen to me explain the math. Zavine reached up with one pale hand, and Liam's entire body tensed, but she just traced a finger along his jawline, feather light and ice cold, her touch somehow gentle despite the lethal potential in those hands. You talk when you're nervous. It's either that or pass out, and passing out seems less dignified. Most humans would have stopped making eye contact by now, would have looked away, submitted, acknowledged the power differential. Her finger continued its path along his jaw, and Liam tried very hard not to think about what that touch meant, what she was testing for. You haven't. Should I? He managed to keep his voice mostly steady. Is that what you want? What I want, Savine said slowly, is rarely what's good for anyone involved, including myself. The admission caught him off guard. There was something almost vulnerable in it, a crack in the armor of the terrifying general everyone whispered about. That sounds like experience talking. 237 years of experience. She said it casually, like people admitted to being older than some space stations every day. I've had time to learn what happens when my kind gets involved with yours. Liam's brain stuttered on the number. 237. He was 28. She'd been alive when his great-great-great-grandparents were young. She'd probably fought in wars that were historical footnotes in databases he'd never bothered to read. That's a lot of therapy chickens worth of experience. She laughed. Actually laughed, a sound that transformed her face entirely, making her look younger and somehow infinitely more dangerous. I've never heard it phrased quite that way. I have a gift for inappropriate comparisons. Captain Torres says it's my least endearing quality, which is really saying something because he's seen me try to parallel park a shuttle. Liam took a breath, trying to organize his thoughts into something resembling coherent. You said I'd die when you grabbed me. You said you'll die human like it was a fact, not a threat. It is a fact. The amusement faded from her expression, replaced by something harder, colder. Humans who bond with my kind don't survive it. Not long term. Your physiology can't handle the connection. The longest recorded bond lasted 18 months before the human systems collapsed. Most last less than a year. Cheerful. Honest. Her hand dropped from his face, but she didn't step back. I could simply take what I want. I'm strong enough, fast enough, have enough rank that questions wouldn't be asked. But I don't operate that way. I never have. So this is what informed consent before disaster? Liam tried to process what she was actually saying, what this entire bizarre interaction meant. You're giving me a choice. I'm giving you information. The choice is yours. Zavin's crimson eyes locked onto his. You can walk away right now. This conversation never happened. You tripped, I steadied you, we both went about our duties. No consequences, no complications. You deliver your data cores, file your reports, return to your ship, and forget the general you accidentally groped in Corridor 7 Beta. That's option one. That's option one. Liam waited, his heart doing complicated things against his ribs. And option two? Option two involves you understanding exactly what you'd be accepting. Her voice dropped lower, intimate despite the industrial surroundings. My kind bonds deeply or not at all, Navigator. There's no casual involvement, no halfway measures. Once formed, the connection is consuming. Physically, emotionally, psychologically. It will change you. It will eventually kill you. And I can't promise it will be gentle. You're really selling this. I'm being honest. You deserve that much. Something flickered across her face, an emotion too quick to identify. Most humans run when they understand what's being offered. Self-preservation is a powerful instinct. And if I don't run? Savine went very still. That predatory stillness that reminded Liam she wasn't human, wasn't even close despite the superficial similarities. Then you'd be either the bravest person I've met in 2 centuries, she said quietly, or the most self-destructive. Could be both. I did volunteer for reconstruction duty on a station that's held together by spite and emergency sealant. Liam tried to read her expression, failed completely, and decided honesty was probably his only viable strategy at this point. Can I ask you something that might be incredibly rude? You've already committed several breaches of protocol. One more won't significantly alter your situation. Why me? He gestured vaguely at himself, at the corridor, at the absurdity of everything. You're a general. You're 237 years old. You've probably met thousands of humans, and I'm just a navigator who trips over debris and makes inappropriate jokes about flooring. What about this disaster of a situation made you decide to have this conversation instead of just court-martialing me and moving on? Zavine considered the question with the same seriousness she probably applied to tactical decisions. You made me laugh, twice. That hasn't happened in approximately 4 years. She tilted her head, studying him. And when you realized what I was, you didn't flinch, didn't look away, didn't start calculating exit routes or mentally composing prayers. You just kept talking, kept making eye contact, treated me like a person who happened to have unusual dietary requirements rather than a monster wearing a uniform. I mean, technically, you are a person with unusual dietary requirements. The monster part seems subjective. See? You're doing it again. Something that might have been fondness crossed her features. Most humans can't manage that. They see the red eyes, process the implications, and everything changes. Fear, revulsion, morbid fascination. But you're standing here debating semantics like we're discussing lunch options in the commissary. To be fair, I'm also terrified. I'm just very good at compartmentalizing terror and expressing it through increasingly poor decision-making. Liam shifted the pack on his shoulders, trying to buy himself time to think. If I understand correctly, you're offering me something that will definitely kill me, probably painfully, but might be interesting in the interim. Is that accurate? Remarkably succinct. And you're doing this because I made you laugh and didn't immediately sprint away screaming. The bar is apparently quite low. She said it with such dry humor that Liam almost laughed himself. Though in fairness, the sprinting away screaming is a common response. There was an incident 3 months ago with a diplomatic attaché that required sedatives and 2 weeks of therapy. What did you do? Smiled at him. Apparently my teeth are unsettling when viewed up close. Liam looked at her mouth, at the teeth that were indeed slightly sharper than human normal, designed for purposes he was trying very hard not to think about. They're noticeable, but I wouldn't say traumatizing. You're still doing it, still looking directly at what frightens you and making observations like you're filing a report. Zavine moved closer still, and Liam realized she was testing him, waiting for the moment he'd break, would show the fear she knew had to be there. Why? Honestly, because if I'm going to die in some horrible way, I'd prefer it to be interesting. and you're the most interesting thing that's happened to me since the war ended." He met her crimson eyes steadily, surprised by his own honesty. "I've spent 3 months plotting navigation routes through debris fields, filing reports about hull stress and supply shortages, watching the universe get smaller and duller. Then I trip over a piece of conduit, accidentally grab a general's rear end, and suddenly I'm having a conversation about mortality and metabolic requirements with someone who's older than my entire family tree. It's objectively terrifying, but it's also the most alive I've felt in months." Something shifted in her expression, a softening around the eyes that made her look almost uncertain. "You understand what you'd be giving up? A normal lifespan? Normalcy itself? The possibility of safety? I'm a navigator on a reconstruction detail in a demilitarized zone where both sides are still figuring out whether they hate each other or not. Safety was never really on the table." Liam surprised himself by reaching out, touching her hand where it rested against the bulkhead near his shoulder. Her skin was ice cold, impossibly smooth, and she went absolutely still at the contact. "And normal has always been overrated. I once had a CO tell me I was too curious for my own good, that I asked too many questions about things that didn't concern me. Turns out he was right. Curiosity is dangerous around my kind. So is everything else, apparently. May as well commit to it." He was trying to sound confident, but his hand was shaking slightly where it touched hers. "What happens next? If I choose option 2, I mean. Do you bite me right here in the corridor? Is there paperwork? Please tell me there's paperwork. Paperwork makes everything feel official and slightly less insane." Zavine's laugh was softer this time, almost gentle. "No biting in corridors. I have some standards." She turned her hand over, threading her fingers through his, and the cold of her skin against his was shocking and somehow right. "If you choose this, you come to my quarters. 7 Delta, section command level. 2,200 hours. That gives you 6 hours to reconsider, to process what this means, to run away if your survival instincts override your curiosity. 6 hours to panic and change my mind. 6 hours to be certain." Her grip tightened fractionally. "I need you to be certain, Navigator, because once this starts, once the bond begins to form, stopping it would be almost as dangerous as continuing, for both of us." "No pressure then." "Quite a lot of pressure, actually." She released his hand, stepped back, and Liam immediately missed the cold of her touch, which was probably a bad sign. "Deliver your data cores. Finish your shift. Think about what a normal, safe life looks like versus what I'm offering. Then decide." Liam made it to the data center on autopilot, his brain operating on some backup system, while his primary consciousness tried to process what had just happened. The technician on duty, a bored-looking corporal with the kind of facial hair that suggested he'd given up on regulations around the same time the station gave up on proper lighting, barely glanced up as Liam dumped the pack of cores on the counter. "Sign here," the corporal said, pushing a data pad across. "And here. Initial there. No, there. Your handwriting is terrible." "I'm having a day," Liam managed, scrawling something that approximated his signature. "Aren't we all?" The corporal logged the delivery with the enthusiasm of someone counting ceiling tiles. "You look like you've seen a ghost. Station got to you already?" "Something like that." Liam tried to organize his thoughts into something resembling coherence. "Question. Hypothetically, if someone offered you something that was definitely going to kill you, but might be really interesting first, would you take it?" The corporal looked up from his terminal, actually making eye contact for the first time. "Is this about the experimental rations in Base 6? Because I already told medical I wasn't touching those again." "Different situation. More metaphorical death." "Metaphorical death is the best kind, and that's barely death at all." The corporal went back to his logging. "Look, we're on a half-destroyed station in a zone where people shot at each other 6 months ago. Everything here is potentially lethal. The shower in my quarters electrocuted me last week. You want my advice? Do the interesting thing. At least you'll have a story." "That's surprisingly philosophical. I've been stationed here 8 months. You either develop philosophy or develop substance abuse problems. I chose philosophy because the station's medical AI won't prescribe anything fun." He stamped something on the data pad with unnecessary force. "You're cleared. Try not to die in any boring ways." Liam left the data center feeling somehow more confused than when he'd entered. The corridor outside was empty, most of the station on second shift rotation, and his footsteps echoed off the damaged bulkheads with a loneliness that seemed profound. He checked his chronometer. 1,800 hours. 4 hours until 2,200. 4 hours to decide whether he was brave or suicidal or possibly both. His quarters were in the lower decks, a space barely large enough to qualify as a closet, with a bunk that folded down from the wall and a storage locker that didn't quite close properly. The recycler in the corner made a noise like a dying animal every 3 hours, and the viewport, technically a luxury on a station this size, looked out onto a debris field that was depressing even by post-war standards. Home, sweet home. He sat on the bunk and tried to think rationally. Savine was offering him something that would kill him. That was fact, not speculation. The files were clear about human survival rates in bonds with Crimson-eyed Valeth. 0% long-term. The longest anyone had lasted was 18 months, and the medical reports suggested those final weeks had been agonizing. As the human system slowly collapsed under the strain of a connection their biology wasn't designed to handle. On the other hand, he'd be spending those months, however many he got, with the most fascinating person he'd ever met. A woman who was 237 years old and still bothered to give him a choice, who laughed at his terrible jokes and tested his courage with cold fingers and crimson eyes, who could have simply taken what she wanted, but instead stood in a corridor offering him honesty and warning him away. "This is insane," Liam said aloud to his empty quarters. "This is objectively, measurably insane." The recycler made its dying animal noise, which felt like cosmic commentary. He pulled up his personal terminal and did what he probably should have done hours ago: searched the station database for everything on General Savine. The service record was extensive. 2 centuries of military history, most of it classified above his clearance level, but the unclassified portions were impressive enough. She'd held positions that shouldn't have been possible, survived engagements that killed everyone else involved, commanded respect from both Valeth and human forces during the brief periods of cooperation before the war. There were commendations, tactical analyses, even a few personal logs from officers who'd served under her. "Brilliant strategist," one wrote. "Absolutely terrifying but fair. She'll push you harder than you think you can go, but she never asked for anything she wouldn't do herself." Another noted, "General Savine executed a boarding action that should have been suicide. She went in first, lost 3 soldiers, remembers all their names." The personal stuff was harder to find, buried in footnotes and classified annexes. There had been others, humans who'd chosen what Savine was offering him now. The files were clinical, medical reports devoid of emotion. Subject A, 18 months before systemic collapse. Subject B, 11 months before cardiac failure. Subject C, 14 months before neural degradation. They were statistics now, numbers in a database. But they'd been people once. People who'd made the same choice Liam was considering, who'd decided that whatever Savine offered was worth the cost. He wondered if they'd regretted it at the end. His communicator chirped, a message from Captain Torres. "Carver, you missed the shift debrief. Everything okay? You're not having another chicken situation, are you?" Liam typed back, "No chickens. Just delivered the cores. Everything's fine." It was possibly the biggest lie he'd ever told. 1,900 hours, 3 hours left. Liam tried to eat something from the commissary dispenser, gave up after 2 bites of what the menu optimistically called protein medley, and found himself wandering the station. He passed the observation deck where a few off-duty personnel were watching the debris field drift past. He walked through the medical bay where a harried doctor was arguing with the FHY about proper antibiotic dosing. He even found himself near the Section 7 Delta command level, close enough to see the corridor that led to officer country, before his nerve failed and he retreated. 2,100 hours. 1 hour. Liam was back in his quarters, staring at the ceiling, trying to remember what Captain Torres had said during their last actual conversation. "You've got potential, Carver. Smart, capable, good instincts when you're not overthinking things. Just need to figure out what you actually want out of this life." What did he want? 21:45. Liam stood outside his quarters, having changed into a clean uniform that didn't smell like recycled air, in desperation, and realized he'd already made his decision. Probably made it the moment Savine's cold fingers had touched his jaw, if he was being honest. Maybe even earlier, when she'd laughed at his comment about flooring and he'd seen the person underneath the terrifying reputation. The walk to Section 7 Delta felt longer than it should have, even accounting for the station's maze-like layout. He passed a maintenance crew working on a hull breach, their welding torches throwing shadows that danced across the corridor walls. A pair of Valeth soldiers nodded to him as they passed, their violet eyes curious but not hostile. The war was over. People were trying to remember how to be people again, not just uniforms and survival instincts. The command level was quieter, better maintained. Someone had actually bothered to repair the lighting here, and the deck plates didn't stick to his boots. Officer's country, where the air smelled less like desperation and more like recycled prosperity. Liam found himself standing outside a door marked with Savine's rank and name, his hand hovering over the entry chime, his heart doing acrobatics that would have impressed a zero-G gymnast. He pressed the chime before he could reconsider. The door slid open immediately, like she'd been waiting. Savine stood in the doorway, and Liam was struck by how different she looked without the parade of soldiers and the weight of her reputation. She'd changed out of her formal uniform into something simpler, dark and practical, her white hair loose around her shoulders instead of pulled back in that severe knot. She looked younger, more vulnerable, still absolutely capable of killing him 17 different ways, but also like someone who might appreciate terrible jokes about therapy chickens. "You came," she said, and there was something in her voice that might have been relief. "Did you think I wouldn't? I gave it 60-40 odds. You seem like someone with functional self-preservation instincts buried under the poor decision-making." She stepped back, gesturing him inside. "Come in, navigator. Standing in corridors seems to be our pattern, but we should probably break it." Her quarters were larger than his, substantially larger, with actual furniture and a viewport that showed stars instead of debris. There were books on a shelf, actual physical books bound in materials he didn't recognize, and what looked like a chess set carved from something dark and glittering, personal touches that spoke of 2 centuries of accumulating things that mattered. "Nice place," Liam said, because his brain had apparently decided small talk was appropriate when facing potentially lethal life decisions. "The chess set is beautiful. Do you play?" "I used to. Haven't found a worthy opponent in 70 years. Zavine moved to a small table where 2 glasses sat next to a bottle of something amber and probably alcoholic. "Drink? It might help with the nerves." "I'm not nervous. I'm terrified in a very calm, collected way." He accepted the glass, took a sip, and tried not to cough as whatever it was burned its way down his throat. "That's strong. Valeth brandy. We process alcohol differently. For you, it's mostly symbolic courage." She took her own glass but didn't drink, just held it while those crimson eyes studied him. "You have questions? Ask them." "All of them?" "We have time. Not infinite time, given what you're choosing, but enough for honesty." Liam sat down on what he hoped was a chair, and not some priceless artifact. "Does it hurt? The bonding?" "Not the way you're thinking. It's intense, overwhelming, like falling and flying simultaneously." Savine settled into the chair across from him with that impossible grace. "The connection forms gradually over weeks. You'll feel me in your thoughts, your emotions. I'll feel you in mine. It's intimate in ways humans don't have words for." "And the dying part?" "Comes later. Months, perhaps a year if you're resilient. Your body will start to fail, systems breaking down under the strain of maintaining a connection your biology wasn't designed to support. I'll feel it happening. That's the worst part, knowing I'm killing you and being unable to stop it. You've done this before, had bonds with humans. 3 times over 2 centuries. Her voice went flat, emotionless in a way that suggested immense pain carefully controlled. "I told myself after the 3rd time that I wouldn't do it again. That watching someone die because they chose me was something I couldn't survive a 4th time. I kept that promise for 47 years. What changed? You grabbed my ass and made a joke about flooring." She said it with such deadpan delivery that Liam actually laughed, surprising himself. I'm serious. You were so absurdly honest, so completely yourself, even in the face of terror. It reminded me what I'd been missing, what I'd given up when I decided safety was more important than connection. Liam set his glass down, leaned forward. Here's what I think. I think you've spent 47 years being the pale shadow, being the general everyone fears, being so careful not to hurt anyone that you forgot how to actually live. And I think maybe we're both a little tired of being safe and small and forgettable. You're not forgettable, Navigator. That's the problem. Liam. My name is Liam. He stood up, crossed the space between them, knelt down so they were eye level. Her crimson eyes widened slightly, surprised. And I'm not choosing this because I'm self-destructive or because I have a death wish. I'm choosing it because in 6 hours of thinking, I couldn't come up with a single good reason to walk away from the most interesting person I've ever met, just because the math is bad. The math isn't bad, it's fatal. Everything's fatal eventually. At least this way, I get to spend however long I have with someone who laughs at my terrible jokes and gives me actual choices instead of just taking what she wants. He reached up, touched her face the way she touched his, felt the cold of her skin and the slight tremor that suggested she wasn't as controlled as she appeared. Teach me to play chess. Tell me stories about 200 years of living. Let me make you laugh. And when it ends, when my biology gives out and the math catches up, at least I'll have had something real. You'll regret it. When the pain starts, when you realize what you're losing, maybe, probably, but I'd regret walking away more. Liam smiled, tried to make it confident even though his hands were shaking. Besides, 18 months is longer than some people get for anything good. I'll take it. Savine closed her eyes, and when she opened them again, something had shifted. The careful control was still there, but underneath it was something raw and wanting and desperately lonely. You're absolutely certain? Because there's no going back. I tripped over debris and accidentally started the most important thing that's ever happened to me. I'm not walking away from that because the ending's sad. Every good story has a sad ending if you read far enough. He stood, pulled her up with him, and was surprised when she came easily, all that lethal grace suddenly uncertain. 7 Delta, 2200 hours. I'm here. I'm choosing this. I'm choosing you. She kissed him then, and her lips were cold and soft and tasted like brandy, and something else, something ancient and dangerous and entirely hers. Liam felt the first threads of the bond beginning to form, felt something in his chest respond to something in hers, a connection snapping into place like a magnetic lock finding its counterpart. This is insane, Xavin whispered against his mouth. Completely, Liam agreed. Want to teach me chess? She laughed, that transformative sound that made her look young and dangerous and alive. You're going to be terrible at it. Probably, but I've got time to learn. They had 18 months, give or take. 18 months of chess games and terrible jokes and learning what it meant to be connected to someone in ways humans weren't designed for. 18 months before Liam's biology would fail and the math would win and Zavine would have to watch someone she cared about die again. But that was future problems. Right now in officers' quarters on a half-wrecked station where former enemies were learning to coexist, a navigator who tripped over debris and a general who'd forgotten how to laugh were choosing each other despite every rational reason not to. The chessboard was already set up. Zavine explained the rules with the patience of someone who had centuries to perfect teaching, and Liam proved immediately that he was, in fact, terrible at chess. But he made her laugh 3 more times in the first game alone, and when she finally checkmated him, her crimson eyes were bright with something that looked remarkably like happiness. Outside the viewport, the stars turned in their endless dance, indifferent to human mathematics and Valeth biology, and the impossible choices people made when they decided that connection mattered more than survival. Liam lost the second game even faster than the first, and he'd never been happier about losing anything in his life. The end.